Hello, we're glad to have you again. Let's see what the ice trap is all about. Saboteur is more often than not the most popular pick for a starter build in Path of Exile. That's mainly because of how powerful it is early in new leagues, and how easily it can transition into the endgame. The following build revolves around the ice trap spell. As a Saboteur, you will benefit from trap-related keystones for more trap damage, as well as Born in the Shadows and Pyromaniac keystones, greatly reducing your chances of getting hit, while also increasing your life and energy shield recovery. With the recent nerfs to the duration traps, it is a reasonable choice to pick traps that deal hit damage. Ice Trap is a strikingly simple trap available early on in the game, and with the Shadow's proximity to trap nodes on a skill tree, it will be powerful from the very beginning. Ice Trap deals, obviously, cold damage, but the build focuses more on causing critical strikes with a high critical multiplier. You can also easily find nodes for that on the left side of the skill tree. You can later add some other damage types on top of cold with items in Flasks. Besides Ice Trap, you will also use Bear Trap, which immobilizes the target and makes it receive increased damage from traps. With traps, you're a bit slower during mapping, but you can stack multiple copies of them one on top of another. It's useful when fighting some bosses or essence monsters. Pyromaniac makes you immune to ignite and shock while regenerating a lot of your life when your traps are activated. Born in the Shadows blinds your opponents, reduces damage taken, and makes you blind immune. Blind is useful when you have a lot of evasion, which will be easy to get as a Shadow. Clear Speed is okay, not as good as Exsanguinate traps, but it gets the job done. Single target damage is very good, you can even cause cold ailments on bosses. The build is extremely cheap and great for a starter. The build requires no unique items, but the general purpose ones listed here are great, not only for the early stages but in the final version of it. We're recommending some of the cheapest ones since it's a starter build. You can easily acquire them even early on in the league, but if you want to get this build working on the endgame bosses, we've included the expensive ones too. If you've already invested a lot in cold penetration, Heat Shiver won't be as effective. But if you can apply an effective chill enhanced by Bonechhill support by linking it with Skitterbots, it's a great choice. It grants no maximum life, which is bad. Tinkerskin is the go-to body armor for all trap builds, including this one. It grants insane bonuses for trapper characters and life, energy shield recovery whenever your traps are triggered by foes. Moderately expensive. Carcass Jack is a good body armor if you want some generic defensive stats and increased area of effect and area damage. It's used in a lot of starter builds. It should be affordable for casual players. Atziri's Step is a very cheap but potent pair of unique boots with great defensive capabilities. Very basic, very cheap, but lacking any elemental resistances. Hyperboreus is the belt that you can use for some extra life, cold resistance, increased damage, and to periodically chill nearby enemies when you focus. There's also a veiled suffix with a lot of useful possible outcomes. The Pandemonius is a very powerful amulet for purely cold DPS builds. It grants a very strong chill effect and a lot of cold damage penetration. It's quite expensive. Malachai's Artifice is a simple solution on how to apply exposure. Simply place there a skill that deals fire or lightning damage and no cold damage. A brand is a good option since it will stick to the bosses. Note that you already use Frostbomb to apply exposure, so if you follow this guide closely you won't need it at all. The best pair of gloves for this build are Slavedriver's Hand. Not only does it solve your mana issues but makes cast speed apply to trap throwing speed as well, so that you can throw them faster. Very expensive early on. Watcher's Eye is one of the best jewels in the game assuming you roll the right aura mods. You should use either Zealotry or Hatred modifiers for offensive mods and Grace or Clarity for utility purposes. In your rare gear, look primarily for maximum life and resistances. After that, seek evasion rating, spell suppression chance, and mana regeneration rate or reduced mana cost of skills. Spell damage and critical strike mods are impactful for more damage, but not as much as the increased gem level of Ice Trap. You will also need some strength for your skill gems. If you have a very high budget to include it in this build, You can try getting a helmet with Delph property that reduces the cold resistance of nearby enemies, but life and resistances are good enough. The best option for this build is a rare wand or dagger. If you want a better weapon, just increase the recommended stats listed here. You can dual wield these weapons, but we recommend having a shield in your offhand. Pick up one of the evasion shields with life, resistances, and one or two of some rare modifiers for more damage or mana reservation efficiency. For your boots, aim for high defensive stats so that you can use additional uniques like Slave Driver's Hand. Rare items provide the most life and resistances. Rare Amulet is a decent pick for this slot. Look for life and purely DPS bonuses. The gem level and critical strikes will be the most important ones. Look for missing attributes and resistances on your rings, and then stack as much life as possible. You can also find some extra DPS, but in a reasonable budget. Those will be found mainly as implicit mods. Just use a standard pair of gloves with life and other common stats until you can afford Slave Driver's Hand, which is a complete game changer for this build. You can alter between regular jewels and Abyss jewels depending on your current equipment. Abyss jewels offer flat maximum life and added cold damage to spells. Just like Abyssal jewels, you are looking for extra life, critical multiplier, and possible standard damage multipliers on the regular jewels. The build does not need any cluster jewels, but you can use one. What's important here is the ability to socket 2 extra medium jewels in it so the cold, elemental, or spell damage bases work fine. It's recommended to use 2 medium cluster jewels with the same exact set of trap passives, guerrilla tactics and surprise sabotage. There are 2 cheap unique flasks we can recommend, Atziri's Promise and the Wise Oak. If you build your character so that your cold resistance is the highest, Wise Oak Flask will grant additional cold damage penetration. Atziri's Promise is a very good and cheap flask that grants you chaos resistance and extra damage. It's more effective with builds that do not invest much in penetration, but generic damage and critical strikes, such as this one. For other flask we can recommend the Life Flask for life recovery, Jade Flask for extra evasion rating, Quicksilver Flask for an increased movement speed, Quartz Flask for phasing and spell suppression chance, or Diamond Flask for an extra critical strike chance. These should remove freeze and bleed or other damage over time ailments on use. The main skill setup consists of Ice Trap linked with Trap and Mine damage, Swift Assembly, and Charged Trap support gems. You can also include Cluster Traps to deal less damage but have more traps, Inspiration to lower the mana cost of skill, added cold damage, increased critical strikes, or cold penetration support gems. We recommend an armor with evasion for more green sockets. Frost Bomb has 3 functions. It applies cold exposure for more cold penetration, reduces life regeneration of affected enemies, and it chills. Link it with increased duration, increased area of effect, or spell cascade to make it last longer or cover more area. The chill effect can be later increased by bone chill support, but if you have a lot of mana to spare, it is better to link it with Skitterbots instead. The cast when damage taken gem should be linked to a guard spell. Steelskin is probably the best candidate, and it requires a lot of strength. If you have more empty sockets in here, put the Summon Stone Golem for passive life regeneration and increased duration support gem. These gems can be leveled all the way up. Flame Dash is a great mobility skill. It teleports you over a short distance and has 3 charges. Link it with low-level Arcane Surge support so that it will grants the buff each time you use the skill. For an extra charge, you can link it with Second Wind support, but that's not necessary. Alternatively, use Frost Blink, it's very similar to Flame Dash. Bear Trap is a trap that increases the damage you deal to the affected enemy with your other traps and mines. Use it against bosses for extra damage. Assassin's Mark is the best curse mark spell. It increases your critical strike chance and multiplier against one single enemy. Cast it manually against bosses. For auras we recommend Grace, that's for sure. It increases your evasion rating significantly. For other auras, you can use Clarity for faster mana regeneration, Zealotry for increased critical strike chance and spell damage, or Hatred for simply more cold damage. The other mana reserving spell you can use is Summon Skitterbots. These minions chill and shock nearby enemies, increasing your damage and slowing down enemies. You can link them with Bone Chill if you haven't done so with a Frost Bomb already. Now for the Bandits and Pantheon. It's one of the builds where helping Alira is as beneficial as taking 2 points. Alira offers mana regeneration, critical multiplier, and elemental resistances. All of these are very useful here. The selection of a major god is up to you. All of them are fitting, but we've settled on the Soul of Solaris for more boss survivability. It's what this build is the best for. The same goes for minor gods, but remember you're already immune to shock and ignite. Soul of Ralakesh is a good pick, makes you take less damage from bleed. The passive skill tree is pretty simple. Just pick the nodes with trap damage or throwing speed, spell suppression chance, critical strike chance and multiplier for spells, and maximum life with evasion rating. All of these nodes are packed tightly near your starting location, making the build extremely efficient. There's also elemental damage nearby you should pick up. If you have a somewhat high energy shield from your gear, pick up the Ghost Dance Keystone. To fit all the auras, we've allocated the 2 mana reservation clusters with Influence and Charisma. For extra chaos resistance, go for 1 with Evil. The masteries are as follows. 2 trap masteries, 1 for a chance to throw additional traps and 1 for Skitterbot's reservation efficiency. Evasion mastery for Grace reservation efficiency. Spell suppression masteries for increased critical strike chance and an extra 12% spell suppression if you meet the requirements. As your elemental mastery, pick the increased effect of non-damaging ailments for a better chill and shock. From critical strike masteries, go for an extra multiplier against unique enemies and increase the effect of non-damaging ailments from critical strikes. That is all that you need to know about Ice Trap Saboteur. You can tinker with some of the features, the build is supple. Stay safe and see you soon.